Welcome back, guys, and welcome to stage 2 of our second off season, which is going to be the draft. In our last video, I covered free agency, and we made a few key trades involving Matt Ryan and Ricardo Allen, and also added a few free agent signings in Solomon Thomas, Justin Britt, and Sharif Finch. But we're going to jump right into things here, starting with a look at the 10 picks we have in the upcoming draft. After going 7 and 9, we get the 10th overall pick in the draft, so we should be in a good position to add a very solid player. And then we also have the 10th pick in the second round as well. We have 2 picks in both the third and fourth rounds, with the 2/3 being only 4 picks apart, and that second one coming from the Matt Ryan trade. The 2 fourth rounders are a bit farther apart at 106 and 125, with the second coming from Kansas City in the Ricardo Allen deal. Then beyond that, we have our 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks, in addition to the Patriots 7th rounder that we acquired in the draft last season. So when our first pick came up, it came down to 4 options, with the choices being between either an outside linebacker or a running back. Last video, I looked at the possibility of trading Devontae Freeman, but I also mentioned how much of a priority outside linebackers and pass rushers were going to be. So this choice really came down to the top 2 here, and those 2 are Sean Chamberlain out of Arizona State, who is a speed rushing outside linebacker, and Jalen Meeks, who is also a speed rusher out of Boston College. Both of these guys had draft stories, with Jalen Meeks' story mentioning whether it's an injury or something else, he wasn't performing up to his standards. And then Chamberlain's story came in the offseason and said he won the All-Star Game MVP with an outstanding performance. The thing about both of these guys that I don't really like is that neither of the top 3 attributes are pass rush moves, so that does worry me a little bit. The other players I considered were running backs Derek Payne and Howard Bradford, and like I mentioned before, I looked at trading Devontae Freeman during the offseason, but he is still on the roster, and while I do like the look of Payne and Bradford, the need on defense is a bit more pressing, and so with the 10th overall pick in the Season 2 draft, we select Sean Chamberlain, outside linebacker, Arizona State. And the first thing you see here is that normal dev, which is always disappointing. It was technically a reach, but only by 2 spots, so not too much to complain about there. Looking at his ratings, he's pretty above average across the board. He doesn't excel at any one thing, and these numbers would be a lot better if he had that higher dev to go along with them. But regardless, he'll be a starter and hopefully will fit well into the new 3-4 scheme. But moving to our next pick, I had a lot to choose from, and starting at the top with running back Howard Bradford once again. He sticks around until the second round and is still an intriguing option with what appears to be good catching, break tackle, and spin move. Below him is Anton Beckham, another running back who has the big combine grade and a couple of A- attributes, but he is a power back and only has a second round true talent as opposed to Bradford's first, so that paired with the scheme fit would likely give the edge to Bradford. Next up is right tackle Terrence Eubanks, and he's a first round true talent and is up here because I haven't really been satisfied with Caleb McGarry. He's developed really slow and is now the weakest link on my offensive line, and Eubanks could potentially be an upgrade to step in and be an immediate starter on that right side of the line. Then we have Kari Richmond, who's a defensive tackle, and despite being an undrafted projection, is a second round true talent, and the thing that caught my eye here is the B+ for finesse moves. I'd like to have more pass rushers, and he looks like he could be a nice interior rusher to add up front. Wide receiver Kyle Woods is a first round true talent that is an intriguing choice that would probably be a lock at this pick if not for acquiring Mecole Hardman. Wide receiver isn't really a huge need for me right now, so while it is intriguing, it might not make the most sense from a value standpoint. And then lastly here is Amari Blaylock, a second round true talent corner, which is a position that I will really need to look hard at moving forward. Desmond Trufant is still good but regressing, and the young guys around him haven't really developed. But with the 42nd overall pick, the Atlanta Falcons select Kari Richmond, defensive tackle, Ole Miss, and this time it's a good pick by 2 spots and a very nice 69 overall, but once again the normal dev kind of kills the excitement a bit. Looking at his ratings, he does have pretty good block shed and finesse moves, but once again these numbers would feel a lot better with a higher dev trait, but I'll get into this pick a little bit more when I go over the players that I passed up. But on to the third round, and with 2 selections only 4 picks apart, we were looking at taking 2 of these 4 players. Starting at the top is Kyle Woods, who we contemplated taking in the second round, and he remains on the board and becomes an even more intriguing pick here in the third round. Dwayne Humphreys is a left guard who is also a first round true talent, and while guard isn't a major need, I could definitely use a solid backup in the event that either Forrest Lamp or Chris Lindstrom went down, and also because I cut last year's starter Jamon Brown, and all that's really left is an aging James Carpenter. Then we have Casey Rivers, another running back who is a second round true talent but is out of that receiving back mold that I mentioned I've wanted to go after. He's probably the weakest of these 4 targets, but could play a nice role as a third down back if selected. And then lastly is Kenyon Griffin, who similar to Humphries would fill that swing guard role and give me a solid and cheap option for the next several years. Just looking at the attributes and combine grade, Humphries looks like the better player, but with our first selection of the 3rd round and the 74th overall pick, we selected Kyle Woods, wide receiver, Alabama, and we have our first hidden dev of the draft. And at number 16 in true talent, this would have been a good pick last round, but it's an even better pick here, and it gives us a very solid receiving group now as he joins Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and McCole Hardman as we look to give Ray Gilbert as many weapons as possible heading into his first full season as the starter. And then 4 picks later, we use the 78th overall pick to select Dwayne Humphries, left guard, South Florida, and once again, another hidden dev and the number 19 in true talent. So we bounce back a bit from the 2 normal devs with our first 2 picks and get 2 of the top 20 players in the draft in the 3rd round. And we get a guard here that is a very solid pass blocker for a rookie, but leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to run blocking, but still a very good pick nonetheless. Moving along though to the first of our 2 4th rounders, I had 3 players to consider, and the first is a familiar face as I also considered Casey Rivers in the 3rd round, and with a 2nd round true talent in the 4th round, as well as being a scheme fit, he's going to be pretty hard to pass up a second time. But below him is a couple of defensive backs, starting with Reggie Billingsley, who is a 3rd round true talent, but his scouting report with C+ and C- attributes is very unspectacular. And then lastly here is Lindsey Baptiste, who is also a 3rd round true talent and has better letter grades and a much better combine grade than Billingsley, but free safety isn't really a huge need. I did trade Ricardo Allen, but DeMonte Casey is the starter, and if I selected Baptiste here, he wouldn't end up seeing much playing time. And with the 106th overall pick, the Atlanta Falcons select Casey Rivers, running back, Florida State, and we get another good pick here in terms of value as he's ranked number 61, and we get him at 106. He does only have the normal dev, but at this point, that's kind of to be expected, and looking at his ratings, he has 91 speed and a decent juke move, and you can't see it here, but he also has 77 catching as well, so look for him to be used in passing formations and likely as the 3rd down back. Fast forward 19 picks, and we are once again selecting in the 4th round where the draft board started to fall apart, and we had 3 targets who all fell below the true talent level of the pick. First is Sean Pearson, an outside linebacker who, despite being a 3rd round projection, is a 6th round true talent, but does have the B- finesse moves, but also has a weak combine grade. Then we have another outside linebacker in Mitchell Hodel, who is a 5th round true talent and also has B- for finesse moves, but beyond that, his letter grades aren't that exciting as the 3rd one drops to a C- in tackle. And lastly is cornerback Kamari Williams, who is also a 5th round true talent, but in looking at his letter grades, I feel like he would fall into the bottom half of my current cornerback group, which makes taking him a tough sell. So with the 29th overall pick in the 4th round, the Falcons select Mitchell Hodel, outside linebacker, New Mexico, and this is the first real bummer pick of the draft. I reached 21 spots in true value and at only a 62 overall, and with normal dev, the chances of him becoming much are very slim. Looking at his ratings, he doesn't really do much well and appears to be a below average pass rusher as well, which is very disappointing. But at this point, the draft board was pretty much wiped, so we'll just announce the last 4 picks, starting with pick number 138, where we took Sean Pearson, outside linebacker, Eastern Washington, and what's better than reaching for 1 below average normal dev pass rusher? Obviously reaching for 2, as this time I reached 26 spots and basically get a slightly worse copy my prospect but change it a little bit so it's not obvious and Deuce Douglas won't notice version of the guy that we just selected. Moving on to the 6th round, we were pretty much drafting blind and picked Ronald Baldwin, tight end, Alabama, and when you draft blind, you reach hard, and we take Baldwin 126 spots ahead of his true value rank. The little bit of solace here is that he's for sure making the team as the 3rd tight end. He's still not a good player, but we didn't necessarily need him to be, but chances are he could likely be gone by next season. Then with the first of our 2 7th rounders, the selection was Darren Rollins, quarterback, Kent State, and with a reach comparable to Michael Jordan in Space Jam, we take Rollins 228 spots ahead of his rank and get one of the worst players in the draft. He does have 82 speed, but throws like 50 Cent and will likely find himself on the practice squad as we continue to search for a backup quarterback. And with our 10th and final pick of the draft, we used the 214th pick to select Riley Springs, outside linebacker, Columbia, an Ivy League pass rusher with a female porn star name, and not a very good pick, but at this point, you're not going to be finding hidden dev gems in the 70s unless they're fullbacks or kickers, so really no room for disappointment here, and instead it's just apathy for a guy that may or may not make the practice squad. So here's a look at the entire class, and I will say that I'm pretty happy with things. I like to lean towards the positive side, but I think the big thing holding this class back was not getting hidden dev on one of my first two picks, and probably more so the first pick. Had I gotten a hidden dev on Chamberlain, I would have drafted 3 players in the top 20 and 4 in the top 40, and 3 of them would have had hidden devs, and that would have been stellar, but the normal dev on the first 2 picks kind of brings down the excitement of the 2 good picks in the 3rd round. Once again, though, after the 3rd round, my picks were really bad with the exception of Rivers, and I didn't get much of any kind of value at all, which is similar to last season. I don't know if the draft was just really top heavy or if I'm not scouting broad enough, but it feels like in both drafts I've done, once I get to that 4th round, all that's left is 5th round or later talent. But moving along here, we're going to take a look at some of the players that I passed on to see whether I made the right choices. And starting in the 1st round, I chose Sean Chamberlain over Jalen Meeks, who went with the 5th pick of the 2nd round. So he almost made it all the way back to us, which would have created a very interesting decision. But he goes to the Lions, and the one thing that he has that Chamberlain doesn't is the hidden dev. I took the better player, but by the end of the year, Meeks is probably going to be right where Chamberlain is and in a better position to progress moving forward. So he probably would have been the better choice to make. I also passed up Derek Payne, who went 2 picks after Meeks and ended up being a 76 overall, and again with hidden dev, and he looks like he's going to be a good player, but the thing here is that with keeping Devontae Freeman, it makes passing him up not as big of a deal, but had I taken him, I would have gotten a good back, and I could have easily moved on from Freeman. Running back Howard Bradford was passed up twice as he was on my board in the 1st and the 2nd round, and he ends up going 1 pick after my 2nd round choice and ends up a 75 overall with hidden dev. He's very similar to Payne and would have fit very well into my offense, and looking back on it, probably would have been a much better choice instead of Richmond. Another running back I passed up in the 2nd round was Anton Beckham, and he ends up going to Green Bay with the 20th pick of the 2nd round, and no real disappointment with passing him up. He's a power back, and the running back I drafted 2 rounds later was only 1 overall point lower and was also a scheme fit, so no worries here. And then we also passed up Terrence Eubanks, a right tackle in the 2nd round. I really liked how his scouting report looked, and at a 72 overall with normal dev, he would have been a better pick than what I made, but I feel like this is more of a push than a disappointment. In the 3rd round, the only player I passed on that I didn't end up drafting was Kenyon Griffin, instead taking Dwayne Humphreys, and I definitely made the right choices here. I had 4 targets and drafted the best 2 in the 3rd round, and then took the other one in the 4th round, so absolutely no complaints here. Then in the next round, I took Casey Rivers over a pair of defensive backs, starting with Reggie Billingsley, who went 1 pick before my second 4th round selection and would have been a disappointing choice. 66 overall and normal dev would have ended up near the bottom of my cornerback group and not really added anything to my roster. Pretty much same story here with Lindsey Baptiste, who was selected by the Titans. He would have been a backup free safety without much promise, but instead I get a decent running back who looks to play significant time this season. And the last player I passed up was another defensive back in Kamari Williams, who goes to the Giants. And again here, he would have ended up at the bottom of the cornerback depth chart with very little potential to play or progress. So even though the players I chose instead weren't that great, they still stand to play a bigger role than a player like this ever would have. Then as we start to wrap up here, I'll run through some of the best picks from around the league, starting with the number 1 overall, Robert Holmberg. The Raiders are going to Raider, and they take a tight end with the 1st overall pick for the first time in NFL history, and he is a 76 overall with hidden devs, so maybe he's the next Gronk or Travis Kelce, but let's be real here. It's the Raiders. With the next pick, the Steelers took defensive end Malcolm Triplett, the best player in the draft, at a 78 overall with hidden dev, and this is one of those players that looks like they'll come in as an immediate starter and turn into a very good player in a short amount of time. The 3rd overall pick goes to Minnesota in Ellis Perryman. He's a 75 overall outside linebacker, again with hidden dev, and is more of a 4-3 linebacker, and being a run stopper, he has good speed, pursuit, and block shedding, so the Vikings get a nice young player there. Another linebacker goes the following pick in Ron Franks to the Giants, 76 overall, hidden dev, and some great attributes for a middle linebacker, and he looks like a player that will turn into a monster moving forward and will come in and be an immediate starter for the Giants. At number 5, the Lions take wide receiver LaMarcus Patterson and continue the trend of hidden dev players. Patterson is a 75 overall and slots in behind Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, but it looks like it shouldn't take long before he becomes one of the top targets in Detroit. 2 picks later, the Miami Dolphins took Dion Ridgeway, a defensive end, and he comes in at a 74 overall with hidden dev and becomes an immediate starter up front for Miami. He's a very balanced end with mid-70s block shedding, power moves, and finesse moves, so given time, he could be an elite, well-rounded player. 1 pick after our selection, the Colts picked up right guard Ralph Harden and got one of the best players in the draft. Harden is a 77 overall with hidden dev and becomes an immediate starter with very solid blocking ratings for both the run and the pass, and he should pair very well with running back Howard Bradford, who you saw earlier, and the Colts took in the 2nd round. The following pick was another stud offensive lineman as Tyrone Boswell goes to the Cardinals, another 77 overall with hidden dev and very solid blocking numbers. Boswell will come in and take over as the starting left tackle protecting quarterback Kyler Murray. At pick 13, the Eagles took free safety Devon Steele, who was only a 71 overall but does have hidden dev. Steele, you might remember, was the Heisman Trophy winner out of Texas Southern and doesn't appear to be anything too special outside of that hidden dev. Moving to later in the 1st round, the Cleveland Browns selected defensive end Floyd Dell, who was a 74 overall with hidden dev. Dell had a story during the season that mentioned there being no passes, even for star athletes, meaning he got suspended, kicked out of school, or something along those lines. But now he gives Cleveland a very well-rounded defender up front. Then 1 pick later, the Chiefs pick up possibly the steal of the draft, getting a 77 overall with hidden dev with the 29th overall pick. He's a run stopper at middle linebacker and gives the Chiefs a much-needed presence at the linebacker position and looks like he could be a beast in a couple years' time. At pick 31, the first quarterback came off the board and went to the Bears in Quincy Price. The 72 overall with hidden dev replaces reigning league MVP Mitchell Trubisky and will become the immediate starter with 82 speed and some pretty good accuracy numbers, so it'll be interesting to see how the Bears do after a Super Bowl losing season. Then countering the Chiefs' possible steal of the draft was their division rival as the Raiders get another 77 overall with hidden dev at running back in Darius Green. Outside of a weak spin move, Green does pretty much everything well with mid-80s ratings across the board and joins Josh Jacobs for an extremely young and talented backfield. And as we wrap up here, we'll take a look at what the teams in my division did, starting with the Saints, whose first rounder and only real solid pick was Dwayne Green, a 71 overall defensive end with normal dev. He currently slots in behind Cam Jordan, so it's not likely we'll see much of him this year. The Panthers were picking 8th overall, and with their first pick took center Drew Clements, who does have hidden dev, but at a 71 overall, and compared to what went around him, this has to be considered a pretty disappointing pick, but he does have solid blocking numbers, so given time, he could end up being a nice player down the road. In the 2nd round, they made up for it a bit, getting running back Taj Palmer, who's a 74 overall, also with hidden dev. The problem here is that with all-around back Christian McCaffrey already on the roster, it's going to be hard for him to see a lot of playing time, but he still appears to be a very solid player nonetheless. Then in the 4th round, the Panthers get another hidden dev in Trenton Harold, a 71 overall strong safety. Harold's ratings don't look too spectacular, but given time, he could end up replacing Eric Reed in the future. The Buccaneers spent their first rounder and 27th overall pick on DeAndre Madison, a 66 overall left tackle with normal dev, so a major disappointment, especially considering what was selected around him at the end of that first round. Madison currently slots in behind Donovan Smith as the backup left tackle. Tampa Bay then had another pick 7 picks later and spent it on defensive end Anthony Bethel, who is only a 65 overall with normal dev, so another major disappointment there. He currently stands to be a backup defensive end and probably won't see much playing time this season. Tampa Bay's struggles continued later in the 2nd round as they picked up another mid-60s normal dev player in Malcolm Holloway. Left guard wasn't really a need for them with Ali Marpet already on the roster, so I'm not sure what they were thinking, but a truly terrible first 3 picks for the Buccaneers. And with their 3rd rounder, the Bucs took wide receiver William Watson, who once again is just a 67 overall with normal dev and is actually the best overall of their first 4 picks, but sitting behind Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Willie Snead, he also doesn't stand to see much playing time this season. And then lastly here, back to some post-draft team moves that I'll run through very quickly. I signed right tackle Sylvester Lambert as an undrafted rookie free agent. He's a 67 overall with normal dev and looks to take the spot left by Ty Sambrailo as the backup swing tackle. Also signed as an undrafted rookie free agent was free safety Corey Yates, another 67 overall with normal dev, and he slots in as the backup free safety behind DeMonte Casey and gives us a much better option at that backup free safety spot than current backup Chris Cooper. And then one final signing was quarterback Brett Hundley. With Ray Gilbert now the starter, I don't have any good options for a backup. Outside of Gilbert, I only have Danny Etling and 52 overall Darren Rollins, who I drafted earlier in this video, on the roster. So Hundley is a major upgrade and gives me something significantly better at that backup quarterback spot. But that's going to do it here, guys. Let me know what you thought of the video and how it was structured, as well as my draft class. This wraps up the off-season activities, and next up will be the preseason, and then it's on to the regular season, so we'll be right back into the swing of things shortly. As always, thank you guys for tuning in, and right about now is when the bird goes...